Welcome to Don't Encourage Us, the show where we talk about the big ideas behind fiction projects of all different kinds. Books, movies, TV shows, video games, nothing's off limits. I'm your host, McCready, and I'm here with my co-host, Captain Stephen Hiller. Are you ready to battle some aliens today?
Always. It's what you're born to do, right?
So today we're discussing the new Netflix adaptation of The Three-Body Problem, a 2006 story by living legend author Cixin Liu. I think I said that right.
I think you did.
But who knows?
I think so.
No one knows.
Leave it in the comments if you didn't.
Oh, man, please don't. But first, what's been on your list lately?
I've been reading a book by Terry Hayes called The Year of the Locust. It's a surprise, a spy thriller about a spy, like they call him a deep cover asset. So he's basically like the most secret part of the CIA, and he's going after a terrorist that has, who's hell-bent on like destroying the world, but we don't really know what he wants to do quite yet. And it's about this guy's kind of hunt for this terrorist in Iran. And yeah, it's pretty good so far. I haven't finished it, but I'm getting it through it little by little. It's a big one. It's like 800 pages or something.
Wow. So he's undercover as a locust? Is that?
As a locust, yeah.
We said deep cover. Is he like pretending to be a terrorist or something?
They just call him, he's like a deep cover agent or whatever. That's just what a deniable
just
asset
sounds cool.
Or whatever. Yeah, denied asset or whatever. Yeah, so he's traveling through the Middle East, basically on foot, trying to find this guy because it's pretty insane. Yeah, it's a really good plot. He wrote another book called I Am Pilgrim, which is a big hit that I really enjoyed.
Oh, that does sound kind of familiar. Yeah, that one seems, I think I've probably seen that in like bookstores when I walk by or something.
Yeah, that one's really good.
Same main character? Is this like a Tom, what is his name? Yep. Tom Clancy's character, Jack Ryan. Is this like a recurring Jack Ryan type character? Or is it different character?
It's like a different, it's a different take. The same idea, but it's like a different take.
Okay,
on like
so new characters. Yeah. Gotcha.
But it could be, they're interchangeable basically in a lot of these books, like the characters, they kind of just blend together. But yeah, it's a pretty exciting book. He's just a really great writer, especially for this genre. Where in this genre, typically, like the hero is just kind of a caricature, He's the hero. That's all you need to know. Kind of like a Jack Reacher type of character. But this one really delves deep into his psychology. He's just very good at like painting a better portrait of your hero. So it becomes all that much better when anything happens to him because you really feel for him. Yeah, I recommend it.
So just out of curiosity, what traits stand out to you that are not your standard traits or what we would expect from an action hero of this type?
I just think he's a lot more vulnerable. He talks a lot about his relationship with his wife and how the job really takes a toll on their relationship, and it kind of shows that throughout the book. So there's a lot of flashbacks about how they met and their relationship during the time that he's been a spy, which has been most of the time, and how the secrecy of his job really has put a massive strain on their relationship. And I notice with these types of books, there's not that sort of, I guess, vulnerability to the character, because usually they meet their love interest while they're in the field, and it kind of follows that whole thread.
You mean until she's killed in the last
exactly,
chapter?
Yeah. So it always has that kind of format. But this is more about his wife's at home. She's wondering where he is all the time, what that does to their relationship when he's coming back from these missions, constantly shot up, but he can't say anything. So I think that's a big piece. And it also just really talks about how the job in general takes such a psychological toll on him over time, and how he starts developing like PTSD from it, which isn't really something that these books really go into. They more or less are just like, our hero's a hero. He goes on missions. He gets shot a bunch of times, recovers, goes back out there.
Right, badass.
But you don't really know. Yeah, you don't really know much about him.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Sounds pretty good. Sounds like he has a lot of time to think about his life while he's walking all over the Middle East.
Yeah, exactly. And being held, taken hostage too. So there's that.
Is he good at what he does? It sounds like he might be too distracted by his personal problems.
I think if he was any better, I think he would not get himself into so much trouble. We wouldn't have much of a novel. He'd just go and like kill the bad guy and go home, you know?
So if he was single, he would just like just run right at the bad guy, take him out.
See what marriage does to you?
The moral of the story. That's so funny. This is what marriage does to your spy career. Oh, that's great. So you have a few hundred more pages to work through on that one, I guess.
A few hundred more, yeah. And I'll be done. I'm always reading it before bed. And it's just it's probably not the best time because I just pass out.
So today we are discussing Three Body Problem, the Netflix adaptation of the Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy. Were you familiar with this before we decided to review it?
Yeah, I started reading the first book, but again, because I started reading it before bed, I started losing the thread of the story. Because, as we'll talk about, it takes place in the virtual world for part of it. It takes place in the real world in current times, the communist revolution. So there's a lot going on. So it probably wasn't the best thing to get into. I need to dedicate more time to it. But what I read, I really enjoyed.
Yeah, so that's a really good point about these books. First of all, the Netflix series is adapting all 3 books, and season 1 jumps around. It's only 8 episodes, but it definitely covers material from the other books. So you kind of need to read them all before if you don't want to be spoiled by the series. You probably need to get through all the books, or at least mostly through them, in order to like not be spoiled by it all by season 1. I don't think it's enough to just read the first book. Definitely you need to get at least halfway through or partly through the second book. I'm not sure if it's exactly halfway, but they pull elements from all 3 books. They're dense. Like Three Body Problem, the first book, is great, but it took me probably like 6 or 8 months to actually read through the first third of the book, because I just kept putting it down because it is so dense and it covers different time periods, like you said. But there's just a lot going on. Once I got past the initial dense stuff, it went much more quickly. If you're looking to tackle these books, understand that you want to invest a good bit. It's like, oh gosh, what was that series about the guy who makes meth? Science teacher.
Oh, Breaking Bad.
Breaking Bad, right. Breaking Bad, right? So everybody kept telling me it was so good. I watched the first couple episodes when it came out, thought, oh, it's fine, but not really my thing. Everyone's like, oh, it's the best thing ever. So I went back and I watched maybe 2 more, and I was like, it's okay. I think it was around episode 5 or 6 or somewhere in there where I was like, oh, okay, now I need to watch all of it. And I got hooked. I think this is a little bit like that. A lot of really great fiction has a slow burn. So this is a good example of that.
I had the same experience with Game of Thrones. I watched the first couple episodes, couldn't get into it. Everyone was telling me how fantastic it was. But then after a few more episodes, you're just totally hooked.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a point, where you get hooked on all that stuff. Absolutely. So the showrunners here, Weiss and Benioff from Game of Thrones, a little bit of controversial pair, I guess, or choice now because of the last, 2-3 seasons of Game of Thrones, 2.5. Not nearly as good as the first few seasons, so this is an opportunity at redemption for them. Notably starring a few people from Game of Thrones. You got John Bradley, who was Samwell Tarly. You have, what's his name? Benedict Wong from Doctor Strange. You have Liam Cunningham, who was Davos on Game of Thrones. Rosalind Chow, I think is how you pronounce that. She was Keiko O'Brien from a couple Star Trek series. So she was very familiar to me. It's good to see her working. Always a great actress.
Isa Gonzalez is really well known. She's going to be in a few, or the next Guy Ritchie movie she's in.
Oh.
She was in Baby Driver.
Okay.
I think. Yeah, some other stuff too. She's a really famous Mexican actress and singer who has made the crossover to the U.S.
And CCH Pounder has a recurring role as the United Nations General Secretary, I think, or Secretary General. There have been previously, I think, 3 adaptations of this. The first was a 2015 film that was not released. The second was I think an animated series in 2022. And then there's a live action series that was released in 2023. Those were all Chinese language projects. And now we have the 2024 Netflix series. So I'm going to warn the audience that this is really hard to talk about without spoiling, not just the series, but the books. Having read all of them, I will try to stay away from the major spoilers, but I don't think we can really provide any context or really talk about it too much without spoiling. Definitely the series, probably the first book and the second book, and I will try not to spoil the third book, but no promises. So now that we're ready to dive into this massive sci-fi masterpiece, what do you think the story was?
It's a story about what happens when you try to make contact with a force, in this case, aliens, and you're not ready to deal with the consequences.
I like that.
I think that would be it in a nutshell. And really, it's about how humanity deals with the prospect of an alien force coming to Earth. Because it's interesting that typically these types of stories are, not these stories, but I guess humanity in general always thinks it's such a safe idea to get in touch with aliens. Like, we're always looking for alien life. But this gives you the big question, should we be?
Yeah. Yeah. Were you familiar with the plot of the novel enough, I guess, or did you look it up or hear about it in order to know where this season might go of the show?
No, because I actually stopped reading it when they were going into the virtual world and dealing with the 3-body problem within.
Okay. Got it. So
that's
the
all
murder mystery, and you got some of the Chinese Cultural Revolution stuff, right?
That's about it.
Okay.
And then to me, I thought that it was just going to be a continuation of that. Like, I thought the plot was going to head into, Earth has the same 3-body problem and we don't realize it or something, and this is going to happen again. That's what I thought was going to happen.
You thought that's in the show? You thought that's was going to happen when you watched the show?
When I watched the show, yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
I was just a little bit, I had that idea when I was reading it, I remember, so I thought maybe that's what was going to happen in the show, that it was really about the virtual world 3-body problem was going to translate over into the real world as the 3-body problem, and the whole show was going to be about solving for that. But little did I know that it was nothing like that.
That's correct. Okay, so did you like that? Do you like where they went versus where you thought they might go?
I do, because I think my version was a lot more simplistic, and it was just a singular threat. One problem that they're trying to, one gigantic problem, obviously, that they're trying to solve for. But I had no idea that it was really about the alien attack that was looming and how they were going to counter that, or how humanity was going to deal with that. It was very surprising, actually. I was like, wow, this is not what I expected at all, which was great.
That's great. Yeah. That was my experience, and I think a lot of people's experience reading the novels is that initially you're like, okay, it's like a murder mystery thing. Oh, okay, there's sci-fi elements. And then you have this, you kind of play out this repeated pattern of discovering that it's not what you thought. The stakes are bigger, and that what you were imagining was a much smaller story than what the actual story is going to end up being. And that continues all the way to the end of the last novel.
It's amazing. I've got to finish them for sure now.
Yeah.
I'm too curious.
The stakes this season, the scope and the stakes are infinitesimal compared to where the series goes in the books. So what you see, which seems, huge, right, is absolutely nothing. Almost literally nothing compared to where it goes. So
don't spoil it.
That's the promise of these novels. And I guess the question we're partly addressing today is, is the series living up to that? Is it rewarding people for their effort? I don't know. We'll see.
Do you think it's as rewarding in any way, shape, or form as reading the novel? Do you think they're doing it justice, or is it just something different altogether?
Yes. I don't know that I'm a good judge because I love the book so much. I know what the story is or what it could be. And watching this, I was really distracted a lot by several things. And one thing that really distracted me was there really wasn't much of a buildup to a lot of these reveals. So you don't really get that, oh, wow moment. Or at least I didn't. You know, they kind of say oh, it's a story about this little group of people. And then it's oh, it gets a little bigger and then it gets bigger. But pretty quickly, third or fourth episode, they start revealing major things so quickly on the heels of each other that you really don't get to sit with the new reality and get used to it. And then it's all boom, okay, now reality's changed again. Especially in the last few episodes where time starts passing in a way that's impossible to understand. They're not time jump. I mean, they're not doing telling a story in two different times like they do in the beginning, but they're oh, we have this idea for something that'll take years to build. Okay, now we're doing it. It's launching. And it's well, how many years is that supposed to be? And there's nothing to give you any sense of that or anchor you at all. They sort of vaguely allude to society's reactions, but one of the things that I love about this author is that he understands people so well. Not just individuals. I mean, his individual characters are interesting, but he understands humanity like a scientist would. He can view human nature and predict and play it out over really extreme circumstances in a way that feels very believable on a huge scale, worldwide. And none of that was really in this. It was just sort of in the background. Instead, we got a really tight focus on the Oxford Five and a couple other characters. And I didn't find that as interesting. So those two elements, the sort of rapid fire revelations that step on each other and the tight focus on some characters who don't really seem particularly interesting or representative of human nature on the whole, I thought was fine. And I could understand why you might want to do that as a storyteller when you're adapting something, but it just isn't similar to the novel experience for me.
I see. They just didn't have enough time. That's what it felt like. It was very compressed. I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the show. But I didn't think 8 episodes of that length could do such a, monumental story justice. And I don't even know what the rest of the story is. You know what I mean?
Right.
Even for these themes, you were saying, they're building, they're building that probe. They talk about it. There's a little bit of friction, we won't have enough money to do it, right? And then all of a sudden, it's this they're at launch day, complete.
Right.
Ready to go. All right, let's see what happens. That was very jarring in terms of the story because there was so much buildup in there. I thought there was going to be so much drama around being able to create it that when it was done, it's really? Wait, what's happening? I thought it was a test launch or a kind of small test that they weren't actually launching it into space. That was really surprising. That's a good point.
Yeah, and it was just too much back to back. They crammed too much in season 1. My guess would be Weiss and Benioff are trying to avoid what happened with Game of Thrones, where they got 4 or 5 seasons in and they got a little too big for their britches. They wanted to move on and make other projects, but they kept getting pulled away to do more Game of Thrones, and that, I think, was frustrating. They felt trapped. Instead of passing it off to other producers, other showrunners, they just said, well, we'll just wrap it up, right? We'll just be done with this and move on to our Star Wars movies or whatever. And that didn't work out. Plus, Netflix has a bad habit of canceling shows, maybe 3-4 seasons in anyway. So I'm assuming that seemed like a melding of preferences, where they're all right, we really only want to fund 3 or 4 seasons. You guys really only want to do 3 or 4 seasons. So we've got 9 million pages of dense material. All right. So that means in the first 8 hours, you need to have all these major things happen, but you can't space them evenly because you have to set the stage. So the first few episodes have to go kind of slow. And then now we have to cram everything into the last 3. I wouldn't have done it that way, but maybe it'll work out in the long run. I think you're going to lose a lot of audience members because it's not going to feel like a relatable world anymore. Too many changes at once.
Do you think it's going to 100% be renewed?
Yeah. Yeah, I would imagine that they had enough clout to make that part of the deal, right? The initial contract is that they would get guaranteed a certain number of seasons. And also, you got to keep in mind, this Chinese author, he has now a lot of very successful projects, like films and series based on his works that made a lot of money. Not so much out here. Like in the West, we're not as familiar with that author, but he is extremely well respected and his work is very popular. There are sequels and stuff and, things like that. So I think there's a lot of money and, I guess this will play in China. Hopefully it'll make some money for Netflix. I just think there's a lot more that will drive the success of this than a typical Netflix show.
They're just so secretive with their numbers in terms of something being a hit or not. So sometimes it's hard to tell. It seems like it could be critically acclaimed and the audience seems to love it, but then all of a sudden they cancel whatever show. Like we had discussed Archive 81. That was one of those I thought, oh, for sure, it's going to be renewed. Nope, canceled. Even though it was a critical hit and audiences loved it too, because they never released how many people are actually watching it, right? How big is their audience?
Yeah, it's interesting. They have odd metrics, I think, or odd calculations for renewal.
They're so focused in on just data in ways that I think that a typical audience member we don't really relate to it because I think we're used to things being either black or white. 30 million people watch XYZ show. Of course it's going to be renewed, like on television,
right?
Let's say.
Right.
But then when you try to translate over to streaming, I think they see it completely differently because they have so much other data to go by, whether something's a hit or not. My guess is they're not even using the same parameters that we do when something's defined as a hit or not.
Yeah, I wonder if that helps them avoid the vocal minority problem where, you end up losing money because you're listening to the people who bother to take to Twitter or write articles or do interviews or whatever, do stupid podcasts.
Right. Yeah, I guess we'll never know unless they publicly release it, right?
Maybe we should do politics that way, right? Just, have somebody assess the actual preferences based on behavior of America and make decisions that way instead of whoever's the loudest in that moment or whoever has the most money in that moment.
Isn't that the typical problem with surveys in general? What people actually do versus what they say they do? There's such a big gap there,
Well, if you think about it with Netflix, if they went around and said, which Netflix shows would you like renewed? And asked their audience, like, even if it just popped up on your screen, it would be biased right off the bat. It wouldn't really be based on watching habits. It would just be based on who bothers to respond to a survey, who understands technology well enough to handle this new challenge presented in the form of answering a survey, right? Who can read it and so on. Whereas if you can just actually measure what people watch and how much time they spend on it, that would seem to be better data, although it meant Mindhunter got canceled, I guess, which I hate.
Right.
Such a good show.
It's a shame. But yeah, I think there's so much going on behind the scenes now that just wasn't happening before. And there's so much of this is just happening automatically. Like spitting out a report, this is a hit and this isn't a hit. Okay, let's buy another, foreign series that's way cheaper, 5 foreign series for the amount of money that we're spending on this one series and see what happens and test it,
Well, I was thinking about that recently. Like I was watching Invincible and Jack Reacher season 2, there's Invincible season 2 as well, on Amazon, and then they instituted commercials, and I pivoted, and instead I'm watching Physical 100 season 2 on Netflix, just because I don't want to deal with commercials. And Physical 100 is, I'm sure costs a fraction to produce than either of those shows. Probably do the whole season on less than the budget of one episode for either of those series. But hey, I'm going to watch it because it doesn't have commercials. I think there's a lot that's interesting to measure and really does influence what we like. So interesting.
Yeah, I think we're in the Wild West now of entertainment, how things are changing so rapidly.
So when I was watching this, I was thinking about this conversation and I was really wondering what you would be confused by Was there anything in the story or in the series that you were like, I don't really get that, or it stood out to you as weird or, bizarre or anything like that?
Yeah, actually, there was one thing that stood out. The girl the young girl who's part of the cult who worships the Lord, which is the alien force.
You are talking about Tatiana.
Tatiana, yeah. They didn't really make it clear whether or not was she possessed or controlled by the aliens? Because she seemed to kill that guy in his apartment. What was his name? Jack Rooney, I believe his name was. The kind of like the mogul of that
right,
Oxford
Jack,
5.
Yeah.
She seemed to kill him extremely violently with a lot of strength and just knocked him into the glass. I thought, I was confused. It seems like she's a human, but then she has superhuman strength. Or was I wrong in even thinking that? Or were they just trying to make that seem very dramatic? Like, what was going on there?
She also is able to disappear at will from
video,
I think
right?
Well, she can sort of create like a cloaking field around her.
Is she just being assisted by aliens? I didn't understand. Does she have powers that are given to her by this alien force? Or were they just being dramatic about the way that she killed this guy? Because it seemed just kind of crazy.
I don't think they really say, but my assumption is that the Sophons are like working with her, right? Like they can create like a stealth field around her or like illusions, right? And I guess they can grant her strength. And probably a few other things. So she seems to have abilities that I'm assuming the Sophons grant. I don't recall anything like that from the novels, so this is a creation of the show. I think she's just a true believer, like a crusader, and her god has given her power. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of confusing in the show because she seems very vulnerable too. And at one point she's injured like a normal human. Yeah.
And she gets shot and drags herself along. Yeah.
But then she also is like, she can teleport, kind of seems like she just appears in different places, right?
Yeah. I don't know. It was unclear other than the ability to not appear to, I guess, the naked eye or cameras and the apparent super strength. I don't know whether she was just quick, or like flew to China, or presumably if the Sophons are helping her, if they can somehow transport her as well. I don't really understand. Like that's not something that I think is explained at all, and I don't recall it from the books. So if it's in there, it was minor.
It just seemed kind of odd. I would have liked it if she was just on one side of that fence or the other. It would have been a lot more believable, Like if she did have kind of special healing powers after being shot or something they could have shown me that would kind of indicate that she is being helped along by that alien species or the AI that they sent. The other one that was a little bit confusing in terms of his role in the plot was is his name Jack Rooney? I keep calling him Jack Rooney. Is that him?
It is. Yep.
I was a little bit confused about him because he didn't seem to be some scientific genius, or did I just miss that?
So, the creation for the show is the Oxford 5, which are, I guess, 5 physicists or 5 students. They all went to Oxford to study advanced physics, if I understood that correctly. John Bradley from Game of Thrones plays one of them. And we'll just kind of briefly go through the group and see if I can remember everybody. So Saul Durand, he ended up being the wall facer. Jack Rooney left and started a business selling snacks and became very wealthy. Augie started her nanothread company, which comes up a few times as important. Jen is sort of the main character as she's the head of the science program at the end, and she continued to work in physics. And then Will was the head pilot of that final spacecraft.
Oh, yeah. The head pilot? Or was that that was good.
Didn't. So Will left the program because I guess he thought or realized that he wasn't really capable enough to do that job. And so he, they all stayed friends and they met in school, but they didn't all continue to pursue that. Does that explain that?
It explains it. It just seemed odd. Out of all of them, he becomes a millionaire through selling snacks or energy drinks or something. It was just kind of odd in terms of like the way they had set up the characters, you know?
Very much. But this was a creation. This was not from the book. So
I see.
It's a thing. So I didn't like this. I hesitate to bring it up because I'm sure some people prefer it, but it seemed very silly that so many major characters from the books would have happened to have all gone to school together and been really close friends. And it just takes so much plausibility out of it. And, you know, we're already straining plausibility for science fiction. So to add to that, this level of coincidence, that's so silly. So I kept wondering if they were going to explain, like in something that was not in the books that I recall, why these 5 people are kind of the center of the universe.
You know, I thought Will's character was very contrived too. I couldn't...
In what way?
Couldn't connect with him. Like, it's just, he seems so kind of... that he lived his life in like such a pathetic way. Like the whole plot line of him like never telling that girl that he was into her ever.
Yep.
You know, like that whole thing was, I think they tried to milk that for such a long time to get you to feel really, really sad when he went on his journey, you know, but I just couldn't connect with him out of all the characters.
He seemed fairly unnecessary until his head is launched into space.
Yeah.
And then it just goes off course. So it's kind of like, as far as season 1 goes, you know, as his story encapsulated in season 1, he really seems like kind of a waste of time.
Yeah. That's what
they could have boiled it down to just a few scenes where he's there, he has a crush on her, that drives her development to some extent, and that's kind of plenty.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I didn't think he was very necessary in terms of the plot. It's just so, and he just so happens to be friends with them too. That was the other, you know.
No, he went to school with them.
That's what I mean.
Oh, you mean, yes.
Just
right.
in general.
Yet another, right, yeah. Whoever their school admissions program, the program admission officer or whatever, the person who decided who's admitted must have been tapped into the universe somehow.
Right.
Seen the future.
To bring them all together. And they're all going to be great friends. And this guy's going to serve this one purpose. And that's going to be...
Yeah, well, we'll see what they do with it. Speaking of tacked on, I also felt like Jack's character was tacked on. Again, spoilers, but when he's killed, I was like, oh, that makes sense, because he's been just extra fat on the story, on the script since the beginning. Like, as Jin is going through and solving the 3-body problem, he's like, hey, yeah, good idea. Whoa, wow, I never would have thought of that. Well, how about we do this obviously wrong thing first? And I was like, what is he even here for?
Yeah.
You know, like he's just there to like fill time with Will. Like, hey, we're not really part of the larger story, but we're friends and your life is sad. And my life is great.
Right.
And your life is sad. But I have lots of money. I don't have any money. When they killed off Jack, I was like, okay, that makes sense. They just wanted to have a shocking death. And they probably wanted to use this actor who they have a lot of experience with, and they thought he would add
with them too. And
yeah, so they kind of wrote him in and beefed up that character too much, so to speak. So I think it was to the detriment of the series, even though I really like that actor.
Yeah, he's a great actor, but I agree. He seemed very tacked on out of all of them. You know, they could have pared him down and the other guy, and maybe they could have said, hey, we're going to get another physicist who wants to donate his head and have him take his one-way trip to space. It would have
find another high school math teacher.
Right.
His head, we can shoot into space. Thomas Wade just kept going, oh, I know who I need. One of these 5 people who know each other really well.
Right.
But he's not at all related or attached to them anyway. He wasn't like a professor of theirs. He wasn't the janitor at their school. He's just like, hey, one of them seems relevant, so let me just keep going to the same location, the same group to pull from for everything that I need. And I'm like, what? What in the world?
Everything.
Are they trying to make some point about God or something? Like, is the Christian God going to come down and save them at the end? Like, you were calling aliens God, but I'm the real thing. Right. That's why I put all these people right in front of you. Yeah, I don't know. This whole like group of friends, I think it would have been fine if they were all just adults who were professionally relevant to whatever was needed, by Earth in that moment. That would have been just fine. It's okay if they have some pre-existing relationships based on the fact that they're scientists or travel in similar circles, or they get sucked into the same Santi three-body problem virtual world and they meet that way, or, that kind of fifth column group of humans working for the aliens, right? Maybe they just meet through that. Like, that's fine. Like, you can do that. You don't have to give them, they didn't sleep together when they were 20. Like, doesn't really add anything.
That's true. Yeah, I think that there's so many parts to this where they just kind of moved the plot along so quickly, and if there was any plot hole or anything that just didn't make much sense, that they kind of just bulldozed through it to the next big plot twist or event. Yeah,
there was just, I think, too much of that, but it's fun. I mean, if you enjoyed it, it means that a lot of the problem was because of what I had in my head already. So while that is relevant when you do an adaptation, so it's like valid criticism, it gives me hope that it's a better product than it seemed. It seemed fine. I thought it was fine, but it sounds like you enjoyed it more than that, which is great.
I did enjoy it, but I'm sure I would have loved reading the books first. Oh, that's my other question for you.
Okay.
Do you think it's completely ruined now?
No. Not even close.
Not even close?
No, not even close. No, what's ruined is some of the big reveals in the first two novels. You'll be like, oh, okay, yeah, well, I saw that coming, right? But then after that, and there's so many details that make it more interesting, like, that give it context, that make it, like, as it is, it's just like, oh, aliens are coming. Okay, well, we've seen a lot of movies about aliens invading Earth, right? So that's okay, kind of interesting. But as you read the book, you'll learn a lot more about why this particular version of that is loved so universally and why it's so refreshing and so much of a change from what we're used to. So yeah, I would still recommend the books highly. But you have now been robbed of a few big surprises.
I'll still read the books, though.
Yeah.
It's a pretty incredible concept.
Oh, you haven't even scratched the surface, but yes. Yeah, absolutely. So a few things maybe I'll ask about, and I'll also provide a little bit of context. One of the changes is that in the novels, it's really, especially initially, it focuses around China. And a lot of the characters are Chinese. And in the story, in the Netflix version, they move to London. I think they're mostly in England, which I think is fine. I think it worked better in China because the author was using Mao's cultural revolution and the way they treated people to set the stage for, how do I put this? The revelations about humanity and the ultimate fate of humanity that I feel like were only really briefly touched on in the Netflix version. The main character, one of the main characters, what's her name? Yi, something like that, or Yi Wenji or something. Anyway, she has her empathy kind of beat out of her, and in the novel, that's, I think, really well written and really well communicated, and she doesn't feel like she's part of humanity anymore. And that's really that's like, as a species, that's our bad, because we don't really treat each other particularly well. And in this case, it bites us in the ass. And that's a really important point that the book makes really well. And then later, as you see how culture adapts to the new challenges presented by the story, you get to see continued reminders of human nature, of aspects of humanity, and it's kind of hard to see, but it feels like a very accurate depiction. And so by moving the story to London and adding this cute little friends thing going on, it really takes away from that piece of it. So I didn't like that. I wish they would have kind of stuck with China, then involved the rest of the world when it was more relevant.
So you think with Yi in particular, it just kind of took away that emphasis that they had in the book around how they took away her humanity, basically, and what would kind of drive her to make this decision?
Yeah, I think partly by moving it from China and partly by other changes to her story, I don't know if they were trying to give some of the female characters more agency or something. I'm not really sure why they made some of these changes, but she's tragically, like, she's one of those characters you can hate but also understand. Because, like, she betrays, as she, I think, says in the Netflix series, she betrays humanity, but humanity had really betrayed her first. And her character was very understandable in the novels, and he was, very poignant. And in the TV show, I kind of felt like she just seemed like a bad guy. Like, she was just being dishonest. And this sort of commitment she had to the aliens seemed really bizarre. Like, why would she think they would be better and all that kind of stuff? So I don't think that was adequate. The context wasn't there for that.
Do you think this series would have been better off, or this first part of the series would have been better off being, like, let's say 16 episodes to flesh things out more? Or do you think it's still
my thought would be to do about the same length, but the last episode is the one where you figure out that the virtual world is actually revealing alien life. It's revealing, like, the reality of aliens and that they're coming, right? I think if they'd taken those 8 episodes and gone back and forth between, like, a murder mystery, a Chinese detective or whatever his agent, I forget what agency he works for, but an investigator in China, a government investigator, trying to figure out why these scientists are dying. And meanwhile, particle physics is yielding garbage results, and they sort of fall into this 3-body world, this virtual world with this advanced technology. And you go between that in the present or the near future, and then you jump back to the Cultural Revolution in the 1960s in China. And then you just go back and forth for most of the episodes, and then the action moves largely to the present, right? You get kind of like what episode 6 is like, her sending the signal back after they warn her not to do that. And then you jump to the present, and then you kind of realize, like, oh, wait, the aliens must have built this tech, or they must be whatever. And at the end, you get the "we are coming" kind of moment, and you realize, oh, wow, there's an invasion on the way. And I think that's a great place to end the first 8 episodes. And then the next 8, you get into a lot of the other stuff that they did, but you take your time and get there.
Yeah, it would have made it for a much better final scene. That's for sure.
Well, I think the problem is it's a little cliche, because I think other invasion stories have done that, where they kind of end, not necessarily the first season, but they kind of end an act or, a key point in this series, first season, where it's like aliens are coming, done, right? So you got to do it more creatively than that. But from a narrative perspective, I think that would have been fine. And then people would have been like, oh, I was wrapped up in this, like, mystery about this murder mystery. And I was learning a lot about the Cultural Revolution in China, which I thought was interesting, but I didn't understand how it was connected to a murder mystery in the present. So, I was learning this stuff, and it was interesting, and the characters were interesting, and the murder mystery was cool. And then it all kind of came together, and it was like, boom, aliens are on the way, and humans are working with them. That's crazy. I can't wait for season 2. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I mean. I mean, I think for this type of show to kind of prime you for a second season, that would have been great.
Yeah.
To just have that big reveal. But yeah.
All right. So did you understand the aliens, like where they're from and what their deal is? Did you have any questions about that?
I think they did a pretty decent job explaining it, because it was straight exposition, right, about where they were from, whether you like that sort of thing or not. There was a lot of...
Oh, yeah. Well, I love it.
There was all...
They literally got a whiteboard out like twice.
Yeah. Explain the whole thing to you,
Which I love.
But it's a fascinating...
But go ahead.
Yeah, no, I found it really interesting. I had never thought about alien... whenever alien technology is thought about, or wherever you hear anybody discussing it, it's always like, it just exists. It's advanced. That's the way it is. I've never really thought about how long that technology would take to develop, and how that could be a huge issue.
Right.
Right. And I found that really fascinating that he took that angle. Like, wait a minute. It took them millions of years to develop that technology, and it's going to take us a few hundred years to be able to counter it. That was so clever, I thought.
The Santi, They're called the Trisolarians in the books, because I think that's a translation, basically, or a close translation of Santi. But in the original book in Chinese, it's Santi, so I guess it's good that it's more authentic. But anyway, the Santi are from our closest star. So they're our nearest neighbors. It just turns out our neighbors are crazy. Their system has 3 stars. Alpha Centauri is one of them. Proxima Centauri is another one. And those 3 stars basically do create the 3-body problem. Did you understand what the 3-body problem is?
Yeah, they're basically the planet at certain points in time gets caught within the gravitational pull of all 3, and it basically gets destroyed.
Yeah, more or less. It gets baked and frozen, and it sometimes it has like a normal...
There's no stable orbit,
right? It has a normal
of one
orbit.
sun.
Right, sometimes. But
yeah.
the main issue there is you can't calculate it. How a planetoid would respond, or a body would respond when 3 larger ones are pulling on it gravitationally. So they're screwed, right? They cannot predict when they're going to be able to use their planet and when they're going to have to go into hibernation. And they evolved that ability to basically dehydrate. And if one of them survives, he or she can rehydrate all the rest of them. But they cannot self-rehydrate. So that has slowed their development dramatically. So their pace of technological development is a real issue in the story.
It's an evolutionary feature that they have, that they can dehydrate, or it's a technology they developed? I didn't really understand that.
I would assume that since they evolved on a planet that it exists under those conditions, that all life on that planet would have developed the ability to protect itself in some way from extreme heat and extreme cold. So this dehydration, rehydration thing is presented as a potential solution to a planet that's only partially or sometimes habitable. So another key piece of the problem that they face is that at some point their planet will be destroyed, but there's no way for them to calculate that. So as soon as they figured that out, they started looking for somewhere else to go.
Right. Yeah, I also thought it was interesting how they were asked in the virtual world. It was that, I don't know, that mystery government guy played by Liam something, right? I think that's his name.
Oh, you're talking about Thomas Wade.
Yeah, Thomas Wade.
Yeah.
I think he might have been the one that asked them, that AI, what they look like. And she says something like, you wouldn't like it.
Yeah.
I thought that was really interesting, because it just got me thinking, like, what size are they?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What do they look like? Do they look like insects? Are they completely different than anything we've ever encountered? Obviously anything that we've ever encountered, but anything that we can see on Earth, relatively speaking.
Right. They have no way of knowing at this point in the story. All they know is that they have better technology. Yeah, I mean, it's great. I think it was... unfortunate that they used a human avatar to speak for the Sophons and essentially for the aliens. So I think it would have been creepier if what spoke for them was less human.
But I guess it would make sense with the technology that they have. They would probably just try to mimic what a human would relate to kind of get them to trust them.
Yeah, sure.
You know, that's how I saw it.
Yeah, no, that works. The wall facers, did you understand that concept?
Their job is to create some kind of strategy to battle the aliens, but they can never write it down or vocalize it. So it all has to be done in their head. But as soon as they vocalize it, that's when it's going to be put into action, if I understood it correctly.
Basically, they can issue commands at any time, but their plan should not be spoken out loud or obvious because they're being observed at all times by the Sophons. So the hope is they can come up with ideas in their mind. Before he was chosen, there was a scene in the graveyard between Yi and Saul. And there was an ant on a gravestone. That's actually how the second book opens, following that analogy or that metaphor. The conversation that they have in the graveyard gets kind of bizarre. Do you remember the joke that she told him?
Yeah, the Einstein joke.
Yeah.
Is that the same one from the book?
It's a reference to what he will ultimately decide. I think what they're trying to do in the series here is set up Yi as the smartest person on Earth. Like, she's always ahead of everyone. And so I don't know if I don't think they explained why Saul was chosen, and it's different enough from the books, and I'm not really sure what the series is going to ultimately say is the reason. But it seems like they were suggesting that she's figured out the solution already, but she can't tell him. So she tells him this Einstein joke, hoping that he will think about it and eventually figure out that it solves the problem.
I see. Okay. Yeah, I didn't pick up on that.
Yeah. So it ties to the dark forest hypothesis and offers part of a solution, or the beginning of a solution, sort of leads you to one. So I didn't know, like, if that just people thought that was weird and then they just kind of moved on, or if it stuck with them.
I would guess most people would just think it was kind of weird
and then just moved on.
Just a strange thing for her to say. And I moved on from that.
Well, Will, that character Will, the one who has cancer, he has like visions and dreams, when he's like drugged or whatever, drunk or something. And when his head is removed from his body, I guess he has a dream or a vision or something. All of those are significant to the plot. So they really, when I was watching it, I was like, this is weird. They're like stopping the narrative to do weird dream sequences. And he's not supposed to be psychic, I don't think, but they're all like, abstract representations of things, or some of his comments are that they just use that character a lot for that, which is weird. You remember the little boats, the little paper boats, all that kind of stuff, right? So they do a lot of that. I think they're setting up stuff from later novels. So anyway, just thought I'd mention that.
I just thought it was maybe like that, what is that hypothesis that the universe is folded on top of each other?
The multi-dimensional theory?
Yeah.
What about that?
Yeah. I thought it was an allusion to that.
Oh, which thing? The boats?
The boats themselves, that they were made of paper in those different shapes.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's not what I'm thinking of when I think of what I read, but that is, that folding is a reference, and it actually pays off in season 1 when they talk about how they made the sophons, which is very different in the books. But hey, whatever. What they did was fine. So yeah. So definitely his character has more significance in that way than is apparent. So anyway.
I would think this show would have been very, very difficult to adapt to a mainstream audience, in having to explain these really advanced scientific concepts in this very tight and compact way and still make this entertaining.
Yeah. Yeah, well, they're necessary to the plot. The science, this is a true science fiction novel because it explores what it means to be human in extreme circumstances really, really well. And in addition, this is a particularly talented scientist author who understands and can explain science in a really interesting way, really complicated science. So there's a lot of it, and the plot pivots on it multiple times. I think they could have done I think you can do it in this story. I think it's challenging, but I think people would be on board with it if they'd taken a little more time to get to some of the really key scientific moments. But I think they kind of crammed too much together, and then they had to rush the explanations.
This had so many plot twists and so many reveals that a typical show would only have one of.
Right.
And you'd be like, wow, this is amazing.
Right.
So there was a lot going on. It's almost like you didn't get a chance to really process it all.
Yep.
Even though I enjoyed it, there was so much going on.
Well, in the books, the journey or the journeys of the main characters are so interesting and emotional that I'm confused why they created this Oxford 5 thing, because those characters, not any one of them is nearly as interesting to follow as it would be to follow the characters from the original novel. There's enough in their stories that you can show it, and then really, it would feel like a rich experience to get to know what would feel like more real people who have a purpose in the story, as opposed to what we get, which is weirdly jumping back and forth between Phoebe and Rachel and Ross. And it's like, why Why are we doing this? So it's okay. It's a choice. I don't know. I don't have Netflix stats on how many audience members would prefer it one way or the other, but it does create a lot of problems to do it this way, especially with the heavier material. So one of my favorite parts in the book series are the nanofilaments, which they use to destroy the ship. Okay, so I'm going to mention it here because I think they ruined it in the TV show. What did you think of that scene? Did it make sense to you? Did you have any issues with it? Anything like that?
I thought it was actually really well done.
Okay. So that's good to hear, because I thought, I was like, all right, they're doing it differently, but and then let me see how it is. And then I was like, why would you do it this way? This is like got to be the worst way to do this. Like, it makes no sense that you would bother to use cutting edge science fiction technology like nanofilaments that are untested to do something so important if you're just trying to accomplish what they accomplished. Like, they blew up the whole fucking ship. Like, what are you doing? So you're looking at me like
that was
okay.
No, that was odd. I mean, I liked the scene overall. Like, I thought it was really cool the way they did it.
Yeah.
But again, if you take a second to think a little bit more about it, why didn't they send some type of assassin on the ship or something?
Right. There's like a million other things you could do. Right. If it's that
like,
important.
That's impossible. That's impossible. We can't. I'm like, yeah, I think you could probably do it, right?
Yeah.
Like, there was the we send rockets, we're gonna blow the ship up. If we send in a special forces team, they're gonna kill everybody.
Yeah.
But they killed everybody. Right. So there was that.
Well,
right.
They kind of set it up. They kind of didn't. I'll give you the novel version in a nutshell. So that ship is the base for the humans who have been secretly trying to pave the way for the Santi to invade Earth in 450 years, right? And it's a ship that is run in the novel. It's owned and run by one of the richest people on Earth who has been secretly living there and preparing this and blah, 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 right? So conspiracy plays. And Thomas Wade figures out, okay, they've been communicating with the aliens. They have the recordings of those conversations and everything else on that ship. They have them stored in hard drives, and we can crack those hard drives, so we need to get them. But every plan that they consider results in essentially, they sort of calculate what would happen, and their estimation is that the hard drives will be destroyed. Like if we board, if we attack, if we use gas, like there's nothing we have that will prevent them from destroying the drives before we can get them. And we need that information more than anything, right? It's not really about killing these traitors. Like, we need that information. And they can't figure a way to like trick them to give it up or anything like that. So the character, our detective character in the novel, has befriended an expert in nanotechnology, and that person has, can make these filaments, and they come up with the idea that if they run the filaments, if they do what they did in the show, then the ship will just be there, and they will be able to get the hard drives and repair them, because the nanofilaments will not do enough damage to completely destroy the hard drives. It will just slice them with such a fine slice on the nano level that they can salvage the information, right? So any questions about that?
No.
Okay. So that's what they do. That's why they do it that way, because the people on the ship will not know what's happening until it's too late. The drives will still be they'll be repairable. Like, they'll be sliced in random places, but it'll be a nano slice. So they'll be able to repair it and retrieve the information. And that's it. So there's not the big explosions and all that other kind of stuff.
I see.
Which make no sense. And that particular drive the guy was holding could have been hit by a nanofilament.
Right.
Right. So they didn't say if it gets sliced, that's okay. We can still use it. We'll still be able to repair it. So if he had just held it a little bit differently, right, then the whole plan would have been a waste anyway. And he had enough time to destroy it. He just didn't.
Right. He just stood there with it.
If he had just had to hit one button and it would have like melted that drive, then it wouldn't have worked. And they didn't know that. They didn't know how far he'd have to go. So I don't know. I think they did it in a very dramatic way for dramatic effect, but I think it totally ruined the point. Especially,
did they explain why they were using that? They didn't, right?
No,
I don't remember them.
I think in the show
it
was just sort of like, oh well, we'll surprise them before they can do anything. But it wasn't enough of a surprise, and it ended with a smoking pile of rubble and this like perfectly intact drive. I was like, come on, guys, really? Like, so anyway, it's such a great part in the novel, and in the TV series, it to me it seemed like nonsensical. But anyway.
Well, I like the book version a lot more.
It was cool.
That would have been good to know, because it almost seems like we're going out of our way to use these nanofibers to make this really cool scene of slicing the ship. But it would have been great to know that it was the nanofiber wouldn't destroy the drive.
Right.
Could have just said that.
Yep.
As a throwaway line even.
Yep.
Right.
Like missiles, all that other stuff could destroy it. It might melt it or whatever. But the nanofilaments just cut right through, and it's such a fine cut that you can repair it and still use the drive. Which, if you think about the scales involved, makes total sense, right? But it's not something anyone would ever think of or have a defense against. So very clever and indicative of the creativity of the author. Like, he's truly brilliant. Like, I've read, I think everything he's written that's been translated into English, including multiple translations of the same stuff. And there was recently another collection of his work released, and it was available for pre-order. And I have that, and I haven't even looked to see if it's stuff I've already read, but I just went ahead and got it. I mean, how much are these books anyway, right? They're not that much. Good. So a question for you. Do you think that Weiss and Benioff are on track for redemption based on season 1 of this show?
It's a good question. I mean, part of me says they've taken such a complicated group of novels and made them digestible to a general audience, which I think in and of itself is a really difficult thing to do. I can criticize all I want, but at the end of the day, it's like, I think some of their choices are, like you said, the Oxford Five. It's a little odd now knowing the way the book took shape, but I can see why you would ground it in these 5 people who have previous relationships with each other to try to pull them together dramatically. I think overall, I would say, yeah, they're on track, but it's hard to tell without a season 2.
Yeah.
It could completely go off the rails in season 2. But I think right now, I think they're on their way.
All right, very good. So in your mind, it's a step in the right direction or a few steps in the right direction, and sets them up to continue to do even bigger things going forward.
I think so, but I don't have a point of comparison to the novels. I think if I did, I could probably answer that question a little more.
I don't think it matters so much. I get your point, but I think like Game of Thrones, not enough people are that married to the novels. And a lot of novel readers are willing to, like myself, willing to cut a lot of slack. Like, you and I are talking about it, and I'm trying to be honest about my reactions. But when people ask me what I thought of it, I'm like, oh, it's great. You should watch it. It's really good, because I want to support it. So I think as long as the average watcher, the people who haven't read the books like yourself, enjoy it and think it's good, then I think it is a step towards redemption for Weiss and Benioff. I think they are headed in the right direction. I'm concerned because the themes, the ideas, the stakes in what I presume will be season 2 and 3 are huge, and it's going to be really hard to ground that stuff for your average consumer or your typical Netflix watcher. So I'm afraid that this went a little too far, too fast, and as a result, they're going to lose everybody real quick in season 2 and 3. I do wish they'd done some version of what I said and drawn it all out and just planned on going at least 5 or 6 seasons, assuming it's going well after season 3. And if they're done with it as producers, just like they should have done on Game of Thrones, walk off, to great applause, right? Be carried off on everybody's shoulders. And then if the last few seasons fall short, it's whoever the new showrunner is. And then Weiss and Benioff get to go make their Star Wars trilogy. But given how successful Game of Thrones was initially, I think if this does okay, then their careers are back on track. I don't know. Do you have any opinion on that?
Yeah, I think this being a hit, which I presume that it is a hit.
I'm not sure. I hope so.
Hopefully. And hopefully because I haven't seen anything about a renewal. I'm assuming it'll be renewed, but have you seen anything about it?
No, I just assumed it was part of the original arrangement.
Yeah, I would hope
they'd
so.
get at least 2 or 3 seasons, yeah.
But, if they plan it out correctly and they planned out, let's say, 3 seasons, and they're not just doing one of the deals where, oh, we were renewed, okay, we better get to work. That could make a big, big difference in terms of the way that this turns out. If it's a rush job just to get another season done, I mean, it could be a big problem. But if maybe they've written it all out already, but who knows?
I don't know.
I don't.
Yeah. I mean, maybe their plan is to hit the brakes, and season 2 will unpack some of the season 1 stuff and really build tension around the Santi coming to Earth and the development of, humans' attempts to develop technology without advancing, like just to develop existing technologies. But you noticed, and it's not a secret, I don't think I'm giving anything away, the introduction of the cryopreservation technology, that really opens up things for our characters, because now nobody is tied to the normal span of a human lifetime, right? And so that, in my mind, does not suggest that season 2 is going to be slower and more grounded. I think now that that's on the table, all bets are off. Time will fly.
Yeah, and I'm also curious if Netflix allows access to the data around the show to the actual showrunners who created it. Because it would be interesting to see, how that would affect the writing of, let's say, season 2, if it hasn't been written already.
Right.
If they notice that certain characters resonate a lot more with watchers, there's not a decline in viewership. A lot more people seem to be watching scenes with XYZ actor or with these themes of the first show. And how would you adapt that to the second? How would you tweak it?
Yeah.
Or would you not tweak it at all? And has it already been written? And, it's just going to go the way it goes. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Having data like that,
Yeah.
that you could actually change the trajectory of a show based on such detailed data around viewership.
Well, at some point, that additional data becomes another cook in the kitchen.
Yeah.
So I don't know how
it could affect it in a really, really bad way.
Yeah. There's a line, it's helpful and that it isn't, because the data does not understand, it doesn't have any kind of sense and projection in the future and no intelligence. It's all about how do you interpret it. And if you interpret it too much based on face value, then you can drive a story into the ground, For example, Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book where he talked about how Blue's Clues is so superior to Sesame Street. And he gave all the reasons why that is. And, Malcolm Gladwell's, he's an interesting guy. He likes to reason through things himself and provide evidence to support his conclusions. Not necessarily a scientific approach, or even really a good data evaluation approach. But as we've all seen, Blue's Clues is not at all superior as Sesame Street is, and will last much, much longer. And while there may be some advantages to the way Blue's Clues did things, one of the biggest disadvantages of the way it did things is it burned itself out. So in my mind, that's very similar to what you suggested. If you make a new show and you put out, 8 to 10 hours of it, and audience watch data suggests that a particular character or actor is very popular, and then you add more of that actor or character into the next season, that seems like a no-brainer, except you don't really understand the trajectory. Like, maybe people are going to be tired of that person. Maybe it's too much, right? Maybe it would be better if you had less of them in season 2 and then they came back in season 3. Like, the data cannot evaluate why or what or what's going to happen for whatever reasons, right? It really can't do that well. It can't extrapolate as well as people would imagine. And, as humans, we tend to interpret things based on our own biases and limitations. So I don't know, like, that data just becomes another cook in the kitchen, and it might be more confusing than helpful, especially when you have a series that's so artfully put together, already done.
All right. Yeah. It does make you think, though, how much we're going to put faith in data that we shouldn't be putting faith in. I know we're doing it already, but I think that'll be more and more of an issue moving forward.
Yeah. Well, I mean, hopefully a science will develop or an art will develop of interpreting and using data in a way that interfaces effectively with creativity. You know, it's not enough just to say, hey, people tuned out partway through the whiteboard explanation of the three-body problem or enhancing a signal using the sun. So less science, right? I don't know if that, I think you take that out and it kind of ruins the whole thing, even though people may not fully understand it, or some people may not they may tune out a bit, but in their mind, they may be thinking, oh, wow, they've been talking about science stuff for 2 minutes. So clearly this makes sense. And the buy-in continues, right? Whereas if you take that out, you get a little bit of what I experienced with the Walking Dead clone on HBO, Last of Us. And when they took out the science stuff, I lost my buy-in. Like it stopped feeling like a real grounded world. So yeah, I don't know that the data would show that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. I see what you're saying. And at the end of the day, creativity, I think it should be something where you're creating art and then there's certain audiences that like it and other audiences that don't.
Well, yeah.
Not manipulating your art just to make it fit into a specific mold. Because like you said, it could completely backfire.
Yeah.
Because you really don't know.
Well, but that's the thing. If a human is involved who does understand audiences and how classic entertainment properties have gone from sort of below the radar to hugely popular or critically unpopular or some sort of like mixed reviews to becoming iconic and so on and so forth, then they can take that data and they can advise. They can say like, all right, well, we're dealing with a creative showrunner of this particular profile who thinks and creates this way, and we're dealing with a project that fits this particular profile and how audiences tend to react to it over decades. And then we're looking at these data points, which we can run through our understanding of the first two things. And this is what we're going to tell the creator. This is how we're going to interpret that for her so that she can write next season. Or this is the data we're going to ignore because that tends to average out or reverse over time if these other aspects of the show catch on or work, right? So I think if you have experts who are humans who can understand and continuously update that art and that science, then they can use that data to help. But I think the way we do it now is probably super clumsy, you know, where they've got like, oh, we have 8 years of data and we're going to use that to extrapolate all these things in a way that like, it's all experiment. You know, they're just constantly throwing things against the wall and seeing what sticks. I don't think they understand the creative mind or audience opinion over time or any of that stuff well enough to really reliably use that kind of data.
Yeah. It makes me think of, I think it was Steve Jobs that said something about customers don't know what they want. So if we wait around for them to tell us what they want, we'll never create what we think is best for them. Like when he was creating the smartphone or the iPod or any of these other technologies.
Right.
And in so many ways, he was right.
Yeah.
You know, people probably weren't thinking, I mean, they weren't thinking at all, hey, I need a supercomputer in my pocket with a touch screen. That's what I need right now.
Yeah.
And now imagine living life without that device, right? So this kind of makes me think of him when we're talking about this, because at the end of the day, you know, a lot of times people don't know what they want.
Right.
There's so many sleeper hit songs, right? That shouldn't be a hit song.
Oh, entire subgenres. Yeah.
It shouldn't work, but it does.
I hope Netflix is not trying to play Moneyball with entertainment, right? I think that's appealing to some people, especially since that movie came out. It's like, oh, we'll just look at the stats and we can assemble mathematically the perfect series and movie, and we'll put Ryan Reynolds in it and Gal Gadot, and it'll be a huge hit, right? And I don't think that works at all, especially not in creative and projects of any kind, right? It just doesn't. So I hope Netflix is thinking longer term and bigger picture instead of just trying to calculate everything based on stats.
It's a good question. I mean, I hope they're not doing it, but I think a company like that, that's basically a tech company,
Yeah, I bet they want to do
doing that.
They really want to play Moneyball
all the time.
Yeah, I'll bet they do.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, that would explain a lot why they have canceled some shows, which, had they continued, would be just a huge audience, iconic shows. Maybe their last season wouldn't have been as good, like X-Files, maybe the last season or two. But you think about X-Files, you think about Fox, right? But like nobody watches Fox anymore. Is that even a channel? I don't even know.
Right.
But that was something that was defining for them, that brought them into the forefront. I don't think if they were playing, if they had the stats Netflix has now, presumably, and Fox was trying to play Moneyball, we would have gotten ridiculous Baywatch clones or something at that time. We would not have gotten X-Files. Especially, we wouldn't have gotten 3 seasons of it, because I don't think it really was a hit in season 1 or 2, if I recall. So, I think it's a mistake to try to boil everything down to stats. I think you need an entire profession of people who are educated in understanding creative individuals, the creative process, how audiences respond to things over decades, and then how to integrate stats into a useful way into that. And I can tell you, the average Hollywood executive with their liberal arts degree or whatever, their law degree, or they have not been trained to do that, whether they think they're innately gifted or not.
Yeah, and I think using data in that way is a slippery slope, because you're just going to start adding more and more data sets and more analysis. And then at the end of the day, you're putting the creative endeavor into the hands of a data scientist who has a creative angle, or a creative specialty. And I don't know how much better that is than putting into the hands of an algorithm that has less human interaction.
Well, I think you're suggesting that humanity has turned down the wrong road. We've headed down a dead end. And at some point, we're going to have to back up and reverse some of what we did, like, TikTok, not to pick on them specifically, but TikTok specifically, and, go back closer to some earlier point in time, like go maybe to Notorious, right? Go back to that kind of film, and then go from there in a different direction, forward. That isn't a dead end.
I think there'll be a reversal where a lot of creative people will step away from the data, or organizations. Let's say, I'm not going to pick on Netflix either, but
specifically Netflix.
Specifically Netflix now, that uses data to drive creativity.
Yeah.
And go towards or be more attracted by media companies or media conglomerates that aren't using data as much, or giving them a lot more creative freedom to do what they want to do. I think that's going to happen, because all of this is happening so quickly.
Yeah.
Not only like the amount of data that we're collecting, but the interpretation of that data, and, systems that can analyze it all and spit out a result or a report.
Yeah.
And I think if that ends up driving every creative endeavor, for someone who's really creative, I don't think it's going to be really appealing.
No.
If getting notes by way of algorithm or a creative data scientist,
Yeah, I think if it's delivered by one of these hypothetical professionals I'm creating, who has good people skills, right? They understand the creative mind. Then yeah, fundamental to this discussion is this idea of, can you make the intuitive explicit, right? Can you take something that creative people do unconsciously and turn it into something that, an AI specifically can just replicate, that understands the rules and it just replicates it. And there are a lot of problems with that, because what people understand intuitively is just the start, right? They watch millions of episodes of a sitcom, or not millions, but, hundreds of hours of sitcoms. And then they intuitively develop, or over the course of that, they develop an intuitive understanding of the structure of a sitcom, right? Or a sitcom episode. But then when they start writing one, if they choose to do that, they innovate. And they integrate, they pull from multiple other types of understandings, and they create something that is hopefully new and goes in a new direction, and at some point is no longer really a sitcom, right? It's a new thing. Trying to create rules for that are going to be exponentially harder But I think right now, as a society, we're headed down this road, which probably will be a dead end of, well, no, but you can create an AI that can do that. It can figure that out. And I think what we're going to hit potentially is, no, it can't. Like you can't, it cannot innovate in a way that's interesting and allows society to continue to develop culturally at all. It just stunts our growth, and then we have to back out of it, right? So a solution for that, to bridge that gap, are humans who can understand what the AI is trying to do, or what the rules are that have been established, what the data is saying, and then can say to someone like, hey, here's some useful information presented in a way you can absorb. What does your brain do with that? And then let them go, right? And occasionally step in and say, I know you really want to go right, but let me point out some compelling evidence to go left here. And, in a way that person would go, oh, okay, that gives me another idea.
So it's an improvement in terms of source of truth. That becomes more maybe accurate, in the sense that the way that data is interpreted is more accurate, or is more digestible by someone who's in a creative field.
I like that.
It makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and I think in what you're saying kind of reminds me of this idea of the five senses. So if, as a species, we were granted another sense, right, another source of data or information for our brains, then that's very different than replacing the brain. And I think using AI, as I've said repeatedly, I think AI should be limited to like sorting garbage at the dump for recycling and cleaning plastic out of the ocean. AI should not be making art and doing, our cultural development for us, or expressing our creativity. Like, I don't think that makes any sense at all. And it's driven entirely by money, which is the worst motivation for cultural changes. Like, terrible. It's one of the worst. So anyway, if all humans were granted another sense, then we would gradually develop the ability to use that additional information to do more creative things in ways that were really interesting and evolved over time and got more complex. But, replacing the entire brain with something does the opposite. It like basically strips us of a lot of our senses, or using that information. So I just don't get the logic. And I think like I said, I think it's a dead end.
Yeah, that's a good point. You don't want to strip humanity of its agency, right?
Yeah, I mean,
that's what makes us human.
It's like we don't want to do what makes us us. We want to have something else do it. And it's slipping in because the things that we do are hard, and we can't all do them equally. So we're happy to ask for help or get paid. And then instead, once that door is open, it's just replacing that. It'd be like if we all rode around, I think, what was it, Wall-E, right? All the people on the cruise ship are just riding around on floating chairs, and they're not really using their legs, and that's the same. We stop using our ability to write and organize our thoughts. And granted, some people are not as good at that as others, not just because they've practiced or haven't, but because they haven't been taught, or because they didn't have nutrition, or whatever, various reasons. But create something that does it for us, and you take away something that's really important to how we think and what we do. So that's just incredibly stupid.
A fascinating discussion, though, because I think there's certain people that would rather outsource those parts of themselves where they don't feel like they have competency in them, even though in the long run it may be a detriment to them. So maybe they would have the ability to become extremely competent in whatever area, writing or math or science or whatever it is, but they're outsourcing so much of their brain to those things that it's taking away their ability to go through those hurdles and to go through that friction of learning, which is really satisfying in and of itself. Right? This idea of doing hard things. So if we stop doing all hard things, what are we actually doing? Like, humans for millennia have been doing hard things and achieving and moving society forward. But if you outsource the self, essentially, what's left? Are you like those people in Wall-E? Are you just floating along through life with no purpose or meaning? It's an interesting philosophical question,
Wall-E came out at a time where the concern was we are doing that to ourselves physically in a lot of ways. like we're creating technology that does work for us. And without that physical labor, the physical skills involved, we're worsening our existence and dooming our future, dooming our descendants. But now it's shifted entirely to a concern over what we're doing to our brains. We're stripping ourselves of the opportunity to be bad at things and work at it. And again, like, why pictures and paintings and movies and songs, like writing music? Like, why are we having AI do that? It's so bizarre. It's almost like if I was in charge of an alien fleet that wanted to invade, Earth, and we had a few hundred years before we were going to get there, I would introduce this kind of technology in order to turn them into mush. By the time we get there, they'd be so used to turning to machines and technology to do their thinking for them that all we'd have to do is disrupt that and they would be completely helpless.
Isn't there a science fiction story about that where the machines stop working? Is that Philip K. Dick or one of the other, Isaac Asimov? One of them. I haven't read it, but I heard about this concept where it's a planet or a society where everything's run by a machine and one day it just stops working. Kind of like where it seems we're headed now.
There's a Heinlein novel like that, I think. I can't remember.
Maybe.
I mean, it's not an original idea, since we started utilizing technology for day-to-day things, it's been a concern.
Yeah, it's a really big topic, because at the same time, there's a counter argument that says that, we'll outsource a lot of these things, a lot of the things that we're outsourcing now, let's say, like the art, music, etc., but we'll be freeing up our minds to solve bigger problems that we're not even addressing yet that we should be.
Right. Well, it's the same argument as like, well, if you're wasting your time watching hour-long dramas and half-hour sitcoms, you're not going to get as much done as if you just scroll on Instagram. That'll save you a lot of time and brain power, so you can go make your own movies and write your own novels and do huge creative things. Like, it doesn't make sense. And it's definitely not how it plays out.
Yeah. It's a lot to think about, because it is, again, it's really the Wild West right now, technologically in every area. And I think it's moving faster than we can even process. So that's another thing. It's not taking the long road like most technological advances take. It's just, like they talk about extensively in Three-Body Problem, right? It's just a quantum leap that we're taking right now in terms of technology, which is a lot for our minds to handle, I think. We're not equipped for it. We didn't develop in this environment.
Yeah, a lot of his novels and short stories talk about, in a very believable way, how humanity struggles to adapt to such major fundamental shifts in existence. And I love it. And I think there's really great stuff and I think it's in the second novel around isolated pockets of humanity and how they develop for different reasons I'm not going to spoil. And it just really reveals stuff about us today, aspects which, you read it and you're like, wow, that's so extreme. And you think about it for half a second and you're like, yep, that's how we are now. And if you put a group of us in that circumstance, that's probably exactly what would happen, or pretty darn close. And that feels bad because it didn't go well. But hey, it's who we are, and it's not all bleak. It's a mixed bag. It's very realistic. So I'm hoping they incorporate that in the future, but they, like I said earlier, they seem to have shied away. So maybe that's what you and I are saying, is we would love to see some science fiction that explores how the rapid changing, sort of unfettered technological development, right, the wild animal that's running loose through society, how that plays out or could play out as it advances, and how it could affect all of humanity. Like, how are we going to react to that? And I haven't really seen anything or read anything recently that I think starts now with the technology we have and then follows how humanity would likely develop as the technology develops or along with it. So I would enjoy that, because I think there's some pretty extreme things that would happen.
There's only the one book that I that I've read around that Life 3.0 book by Max Tegmark.
Yeah.
It addresses that, which is really fascinating. And I think it would make for really great fodder for a science fiction series or a movie.
That's a great idea.
If you could adapt the concepts in that book, it would really, really be fascinating. The way he explains it, it's totally plausible. You know, the way AI would develop and how we rely on it so much that it could essentially take over, but in a very step-by-step fashion.
Would the ideas in that book be well presented as like an anthology series?
Yes, I think so.
Because I think the problem a lot of times with these kinds of big ideas is that people try to create a singular narrative out of it. And the books we're talking about today, or the series, that author can do that. I have not encountered many authors in my time reading books who I think can do that. I could not do that. It's just too complicated. And the stories become ridiculous or boring, or both, very quickly, because the ideas, it's hard to relate such ideas, important, complicated ideas, and create a narrative context around that is enjoyable and entertaining, as well as true to the source. But I think if you did an anthology series, you could explore the ideas in different contexts and different ways in shorter form that, cumulatively would really tell or present the ideas in a more complete way, but individually would be easier to write from a narrative perspective.
Yeah, I think that it would be a book that would lead itself to that, because there are aspects of it of like, how AI would be used in war. How would AI be used in the court system, or let's say insurance, or any one of the, any societal realm, how it could take over everything.
Yeah.
That would be a large scale movie,
Yeah.
Like how it would actually like go about doing that. The way he explains it is so scary, because it's so logical, and it would play humans against themselves, essentially. It's kind of like three-body problem.
Yeah.
It's really good. I highly recommend it.
Very good. All right. So any questions for the audience?
If you were to take the concepts in the show, would there be anything that you would change specifically? Would you cut out any characters? And how would you replace them, or the concepts that those characters represent in a new version? And could this show be a longer series instead of a limited run? Like, could this be like, set up in a different way?
Yeah.
Where it was just a weekly series. Since there's so many advanced concepts in it, I would think you could just take it anywhere, kind of like Star Trek,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, actually, that's a really good question, and a good analogy, especially for what I assume is coming. So yeah, and I'm also curious, did you like it? Was it good? Because I'm not sure. I'm not sure what people will say. Like, I don't really know what the prevailing opinion is. I don't know if it's mixed or generally positive, or I don't know. I think what I've seen on the internet is basically people like myself who read the books and are like, yeah, great, I want to talk about stuff in the books. So I don't really know how people feel about this series. So great. All right. Well, so as always, thank you to the people who made Three-Body Problem, both the novel and the series. Thank you to everyone involved in productions of that. Thank you to the listeners. Appreciate you sticking around. Stay away from those like and subscribe buttons. If you want to reach us, you can do so at DontEncourage@gmail.com. You can hit us up on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, etc. We have a link tree floating around. I think our Instagram has that, and our YouTube probably has that. So you can click on that and find us wherever you prefer. You can check out the show notes for more information. I encourage you to read the novels. It seems like you probably have time before season 2 comes out. And we will see you next time.
Take care, everybody.